Now, when I was up the other night reading that, the FDA said that to a reasonable certainty, GE salmon is safe for us to eat. What did you think when you heard that?
I think these guys are out of their minds. Completely out of their minds. Bizarre, completely not in touch with reality. But then, also this month, there was a survey that came out which explains why they're out of their minds. This was done by the Union of Concerned Scientists, where about a quarter of the scientists at the FDA who were surveyed, about 1,700 respondents, said they had personally experienced, either frequently or occasionally, situations where corporate interests or Congress, members of Congress, or special interest groups had forced the withdrawal or significant modifications of a policy or action designed to protect consumers or public health. One person who has been in the FDA for a long time said, food safety has succumbed to the higher priority of global corporate profits. Another person said, I've been here for 26 years and it still amazes me how politics filter down to the lowest levels of government. So both politics and corporate profits are running the show at the FDA. And this is not the first time. In fact, the person that created the FDA in the early 1900s, within 10 or 20 years, was absolutely beside himself at how corrupt the organization had become. And later on, more recently, one of the commissioners said, what really bugs me is that people think that the FDA is protecting them when it's not.
It's all about the money, it seems like. Now, how long has this process been going on? I'm sure this just didn't start last week. Has this been a decades-long process, year-long process? What's this been like for the salmon?
Well, it's been more than a decade, and it's interesting. What happened during the Bush administration is that the FDA decided to regulate genetically modified fish as if they were animal drugs. And so what has happened since the beginning, just to give a backstory, they never wanted Congress to go in and make new rules. They wanted to jerry-rig existing rules at the FDA so that they would be able to evaluate GMOs on their own. And you see, they had been told by the White House back in the early 90s, by the first Bush administration, to promote biotechnology. And so they created this whole story that the GMOs were substantially equivalent and it was all lies. In fact, the most substantial lie of the FDA came in the policy that said that the agency is not aware of any information showing that GMOs are significantly different. Now, on that basis, they said no testing was necessary, no labeling was necessary. In fact, you can introduce a GM crop on the market without even telling the FDA. Well, that was revealed as a lie when 44,000 secret FDA documents were made public from a lawsuit, and it turns out the overwhelming consensus among the FDA's own scientists were that GMOs were unsafe, and that the person in charge of policy that had ignored the scientists was Monsanto's former attorney and later their vice president. That's Michael Taylor, and he was placed by the Obama administration as the current U.S. food safety czar, overseeing this process, essentially, of the salmon being approved. Now, because it's being approved as an animal drug, it's another jerry-rigged regulation. It doesn't fit. I mean, when you take a drug and you manufacture it in the laboratory, you have a certain number of compounds and you have a certain idea of the range of the way that those compounds will be created. When you have a salmon or any kind of animal, you have a huge amount of variables. Biology is so much more complex. But even if it were a drug, you know that between 1976 and 1985, more than half of the drugs approved by the FDA ended up having serious or lethal side effects and had to be either withdrawn or relabeled. So even if it were a drug, imagine having to do a recall of salmon when you find out a decade later that it's causing cancer or something. And there's a link to cancer, which we can talk about. So I would not want to be hired by a company to say, our salmon escaped into the ocean. It turns out it's cancerous. It's destroying wild populations. Can you organize a recall?